have always, in my head, said Dijkstra, like the old pitcher from the...
Yeah, that actually comes close enough.
It's close enough. Hey everybody, my name's Indy, and this gentleman sitting right next to me, that's Jay, and on the end we have Juney Dijkstra, and she is from Soedesco.
Hi.
She's from the publisher Soedesco. Welcome to Indie Game Business.
Thank you.
So we're going through, and this is going to be an interesting one, because we always talk about finding the right publisher for your game, but generally we wrap that around, is it on, is that publisher on the right genre, console, platform? Do they have the budget? Are they going to do the marketing? But Juney, who I've known for years, and brought up a really good point on our Discord, I guess months ago at this point. But, there's a ton that a good publisher will do for you outside of just giving you money and marketing your game. And get my mic over here where it's remotely near my mouth. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Juney. And we're going to start where we always start. Talk to us about how you got into the industry, and then walk us through your career up till now.
I was expecting that one, so I actually thought about what to say. I started as a computer science bachelor. Also took math, but quickly dropped that to be able to organize events on the side. And along the way during my bachelor's, I discovered that programming wasn't my thing. I liked the academia, I liked the math, I liked the theory, but the actual coding was best left to other people. So naturally, I decided to also do a master's degree in it. Along the side, I did always organize game dev events. So I've been organizing events in the Dutch game industry I organized until I joined Soedesco, events for like 7 years. So I organized events, for example, for like 20 companies to meet up with 200 students and then just go forth and find internship placements. I also organized a conference for 4 years by students for students. It was called In Development. We grew it out from 250 to eventually 1,000 people. And at the end of the last year, Soedesco was actually one of the sponsors. They organized, or at least sponsored, the In Development Awards that we had. And my LinkedIn profile said, I am looking for a job because I've almost graduated. So my business development colleague, now Hans, noticed that and was like, hey, you can organize things. Maybe you can be a producer with us. And I thought, I have no idea what a producer does. If they organize things, maybe I can do it. And here we are 4.5 years later.
Yeah, we hired many producers back in the day when I was working as a publisher, straight out of GameStop. It's like,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you're somewhat familiar with a game. Congratulations, now you're a producer. It's until very, very recently, there was no real career path to becoming a game producer. You basically looked around the office and said, okay, who has the best all-around knowledge of the game development process? And then more specifically, who has organization skills that are, better than the rest of us? And that's who got to be our producers. So walk us through a little bit of what a producer does, a good producer and a publisher. And so, because that's going to lend into a lot of what we talk about, but
Right.
In your daily course of working with developers, what is it that you do other than yell at them to not miss their milestones?
Right. So something to note is something that we're noticing with a lot of our producers as well, is that a publishing producer is a little bit different from a development producer. You need the same core set of skills. You indeed have to have some sort of organizational sense. You need to be able to take a lot of information and create order out of it. But you also need to be very comfortable with doing your primary mode of communication online. So most of what we do in communication is either Discord, Skype, email, and that you need to be comfortable with that, with making your point in words that are written or over a phone call rather than in person. And with a lot of the development producers that I've ended up being in touch with, they are the people that are on the floor between the people. So they have much more more visible impact on the team that they work with. On the same time, on the publishing side, we also have our fingers in a lot of pies. So we work with platform holders, with service providers, with all sorts of people all across the world. So it's just really a nuance of where you want to be. And that also means that most of the work that we do with developers is from start to finish manage the development planning, the release planning, making sure that everything is ready in time for actual release, and usually that's across platforms. So we give all sorts of warnings like, hey, you have to think about this thing, and hey, is your localization sheet ready yet? Is your build entirely ready to request age ratings with? Are you ready for doing compliance testing externally? Are you missing anything? Like, do you want to add more to your soundtrack? Do you need some sort of additional art assets to make sure that you don't miss this milestone? And of course, everything gearing up to getting ready for submission as well. So what a lot of developers don't realize is that the submission process, it can be pretty lengthy, and there are different hiccups to all the different platforms, and you have to do a lot of things in parallel all of a sudden. So we also help with that. And let's see, what else on the producing side? Of course, we support the marketing and PR team for everything with regards to testing with the public. So things like from the smallest private play tests to the biggest open betas, we will be making sure that the build doesn't crash when you start it up. So whenever an update goes live, it actually does something for people. We also help organize feedback. We're on the tech support side as well. So whenever marketing and PR and the community management guys can't entirely figure out what's going on, we'll be there in on the fringe to make sure that we can figure things out as soon as possible. So otherwise, probably everything that doesn't fit any other department.
Yeah, back in the day, I was a producer and an executive producer, and I have the utmost respect for you because it's a shit ton of work, and it's just absolutely many times managing chaos, and it's a very unsung hero aspect of game development. Because I saw something when I was at over at GIC, and someone was talking about, they introduced themselves, and this, I guess it was a consumer, I think it was the conversation happened at EGX, and they were like, well, what do you do with the game? And the person was like, well, I'm a producer. And they're like, oh, so you don't actually do anything on the game development side? It's like, well, yeah, except for making sure it all comes together into something that's cohesive and a game. So when developers are out there looking, for their ideal publisher for their game, and we've talked a lot about making sure that they have a publisher who's on the right platform, and who's got experience with the right genre, and who you want to make sure that they've got the budget. Your budget is in their budget comfort range. What's the next most important thing for them to be thinking of when they're sorting this triage list of going through it?
Yeah. For me, I think it's about finding a partner that fits with you with what you're looking for. Are you looking for something long-term? Are you just looking for someone for just this one project? For us, it's absolutely about the long-term. We always try to find, we want to spotlight, or we want to choose projects that fit with us, but we also want to find people that fit with us. So we want to find those teams that outside of that first project that might have a lot of potential will also long-term have more projects that they want to do with us, so we can invest in that long-term relationship. And that means opening that dialogue about, hey, what is it that you can do, and what it is it that you think we can help with? And if you don't know, then talk to us about what you think or we might be able to do, we may not be able to do, or just ask us like, hey, what else is there that you can do? And as long as that communication feels open and honest, then we can get a very long way. So as long as you keep communicating and keep an open mind and just engage in that dialogue about how is this partnership going to work now and in the long term, that will usually get you a pretty distance.
So where in the process should they bring that up? Because I know a lot of developers and a lot of people in general, they're less comfortable talking about what they can't do than what they can do. So, generally when we're sending these projects out, there's an introduction email or there's an intro email, or maybe you met at a conference and you're getting the ball rolling. Are these questions that need to be addressed or put forward in that initial pitch, in that initial submission? Or
I'm not sure what the best way would be just yet. I mean, we've only been doing this for 4.5 years, and our projects have been growing since. So we're still every project is a unicorn. We're still learning a lot of stuff every single project. What we have done so far is usually that our business development colleague, Hans, he will be talking about the financials, about just the general scope of the project, see if that's a fit for both our timeline and our budget, which are usually, they're very big topics, but they're also discussed pretty quickly. So they don't take a lot of back and forth. It might still take months to actually work out the deal, but the amount of information that needs to be exchanged is a lot smaller, which means that only he needs to be involved, so it happens all the way at the beginning. After that very important hefty part is out of the way, that budget part, that's when I get introduced, and then I will be digging in deeper, and I will be trying to figure out, hey, what are the technical details? How is your registration so far? Are you using any licensed material? What kind of plugins are you using? What's the state of the engine and the SDK? And it just drill down very deep to see, like, is there anything that could be a risk? Are there any points in the budget that we might have to reserve? And that is the kind of dialogue where I would ideally like the developer to also engage with us and not just provide us with all the answers to the questions that I'm asking, but also ask us questions like, hey, if you do localization, then what kind of languages are you thinking of? If you're going to do testing, what do you have in mind and why? If you maybe think the amount of music that we currently have wouldn't suffice for a standalone soundtrack, who are you thinking of asking to add to it, and how would that work? If you have any questions about finding someone else to support you with your development through us, ask them. So that would be the point for us. So it would definitely be pre-sign, but it wouldn't be the first 20 emails back and forth.
So one of the things you just mentioned, and I'm cheating, of course, because I have this big old gigantic long list of all the stuff that you read off earlier, but when you're asking that question of what other types of things can we help through Soedesco, what are you generally looking at? I mean, we've talked about localization a lot, but what are some of the top, without diving into this entire list that we have immediately, what are some of the top, big things that developers aren't generally aware of or thinking of when they start go to the publisher?
So the things that we do for every single project are always getting translations. So that is definitely all the way at the top. But that is closely followed by getting the age ratings in particular. And with that, I don't just mean ESRB and PEGI or an Iarc rating. With that, I also mean Taiwan and the Arabic territories and just about anything you can think of, because by now I think we're tracking 15.
Really?
And that makes it possible for your game to launch in a lot more territories than before. We also get external testing done, and there are so many flavors of testing, you can't even count them anymore. So you have to figure out what fits with this project. How far is it? What kind of testing have they done? What kind of testing does it still need? How much experience does that team have? And those are basically the three that almost every project will have, in addition to just submission management of making sure that your build is ready for submission, making sure that it passes all the preliminary checks, just to save you time in the entirety of the submission process. And then, of course, managing the actual uploading, completing the documentation, making sure that the slots are booked. None of that is rocket science, but we do it 10 times a year, which also means that we might just do it a little bit more efficiently. We might know a bit more of the tips and tricks. So those are the things that we tend to always do. And from there, it's really, as I said, every project is a unicorn, and it's really just whatever a single project needs, where we're able to support.
All right, so, question on age ratings. Since we've had the rise of digital distribution, are age ratings required for digital sales, like on Steam or through platforms, or is it still just kind of a retail thing?
That depends on the platform. So some platforms enforce them, and they enforce them in different ways. So for console, Nintendo allows you to use an Iarc rating, which is just an online questionnaire that you have to complete. For Steam, you're not obliged to have any ratings at all. For the other consoles, you do actually have to have certain ratings to be able to release at all. You don't have to have all of them, not all of the ones that you would also need for retail, but you do have to have some of them. And then for mobile, I know that Iarc suffices as well.
Hold on, I'm actually looking that up because I'm not familiar with Iarc ratings.
Oh, it's the International Age Rating Coalition. So it's a recent initiative, like 1 or 2 years old. No, probably a bit older, maybe 3. It is basically digital only, and it's a combination of most of the biggest territories that are out there. They don't support all platforms for all ratings, however, which is something that I tell them regularly.
So, is it cheaper or more expensive? Because I know a lot of the
Iarc is free.
It's free. All right, well that's a no-brainer then. I know a lot of these.
It doesn't help. It doesn't yet help you, for example, with PlayStation at all.
With what? I'm sorry, you cut out.
PlayStation.
Well, yeah, that's true. Does Microsoft take it?
Off the top of my head, yes. I'm not sure if that applies for all kinds of games, apps, and projects. I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Anyway, just that's our first tangent of the day. But it's interesting because I wasn't aware of that one, and we get that question a lot because people just don't know anymore. They know obviously at retail, but a lot of indie devs aren't thinking towards retail. They're just thinking of online, and so that's one that comes up.
Yeah, but even so, like, for a lot of developers, especially when they're first confronted with Iarc, they will just click throughout the questionnaire, which is a multiple choice kind of deal, but they don't actually understand the gravity of it. So what we do is we make a very thorough assessment of what the game is to make sure that the right rating gets assigned for the right territory, so you don't get slapped with fines afterwards. So, for example, if there is a game with several different characters, and one of those characters has an alternative that has like an alternate skin that has a cigarette, and you sort of neglect to mention that, or you forget, or you don't consider it to be pertinent, even if the rating is free, you can still get in trouble for not reporting that. And that's the kind of thing where we make sure that we go through the game with a fine-grained comb to make sure that we actually get everything. So even if it becomes easier and free to get your game rated and therefore out on all the platforms, it still doesn't mean that you actually got the rating the right way.
So we've got a question from Just a Game Developer over on Twitch. He says, what happens to a developer when a game flops?
Well, they either get a different job or they will scrape together what they have, hopefully a buffer, and try again, I would think.
All right, so I'll take a spin on that too. Are there things that you've done in the past, things that you've seen in the past to try to salvage some of these titles when you launch initially and it's like you're not getting the initial launch that you're not getting that traction that you wanted to get? Are there things that you can do to try to adjust course, or is it generally one of those, okay,
Right,
this is not going to fly?
It entirely depends on what kind of platforms we have, but we try to make sure that the projects that we have a certain viability, and because of that, we already minimize risk on the front end by making sure that we do as many platforms as we can to reduce the risk, because you are using the same amount of effort on different channels. And then when a project is of a certain production value, certain price point, we will also do retail, which also helps press the risk. And then afterwards, as soon as it's launched, we don't tip.
Wait,
we lost you. Or is that me?
No, she froze up.
For the long term of the long tail for sales, and we make sure that we're participating. We have a solid discounting strategy. We make sure that we're in the different seasonal sales, but also in the different sales that you can sort of shoot in yourself. What we also do is we make sure that we have different SKUs, so we don't just have a base game, but we also have, for example, a deluxe edition that contains a little bit of extra content. Doesn't even have to be in-game content. Could be an art book or a soundtrack or something like that, which then allows you to be in more sales, so you're generating more revenue over time, even if you don't have additional DLC, for example, to push your attention. In that SKU strategy as well, if you do have the opportunity to do DLC, you'll be able to drive your existing player base with that DLC, but the DLC will also end up back in the newest releases list for some of the platforms, where it will also get you more attention all over again.
All right, so you just touched on one point that I think a lot of developers overlook. That's actually extremely super important, from the publisher side, and that is managing all of these seasonal sales. It used to be that Steam did one in the summer, and now they do 2 or 3, and Epic has one. How many of these stores and seasonal sales do you all track on the digital side?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head, but of course we primarily do console and Steam. So those are our top places to be and look out for them. I would have to ask Hans, my colleague, for exact details on that. But yeah, something else that works there is knowing the platform holder, talking to them a lot, and then making sure that you can actually get as much exposure as possible. Talk to them about what kind of strategies are best to apply given their data that they have. And with that, even if one title hasn't done very well at the beginning, if you have another title that's doing well, that's where having a publisher can help, because at that point we will be talking to them about this big thing that we've got going on, and then we'll say, how about you also add this previous title in the same sale, because that could benefit both of us. So that's another thing where post-launch, even for a title that may not have done so well at the beginning, it could still do something else later on down the line.
Yeah, and it's a huge part of everything because, you know, like everything else in life, it's less often what you know and more often who you know. And because, you know, you're launching, like you said, you know, 10 games a year or however many you've got going on, you're dealing with Steam a lot more than, you know, a developer is, or Humble or GOG or whoever it may be. And so having that extra relationship in there and that champion going to them and saying, hey, look, like you said, let's add this other game to the list as well. That's a huge benefit for developers.
And that's not just with platform holders. That's something that we try and do with just in general outreach. When someone's interested in this one horror game and they want a key for it that we've got coming up, and they write about it and they give good feedback, then we'll reach out to them again and say, hey, we also did this other horror game a couple months ago. How about you try this out and give us some feedback for that as well? So it's really not just platform holders. It's a much more broad approach.
So with, you know, we talked about the platform holders, the hardware. What if a developer comes to you and even though the game's being done in Unity or Unreal, they've really only planned for a PC version? You know, we know that it's best to have it out there on as many platforms as possible, but how do you go about trying to find the support that team needs to go ahead and get a version for, you know, Switch or PlayStation or Xbox?
Right. So, of course, the most ideal situation would be that they do it themselves, but that is really only feasible if they already have someone on the team that has some experience with it, and that isn't always the case. Sometimes, depending on the deal structure, you may still want to consider having them do it themselves. For example, if they have a team that has a lot of experience in general, for example, porting to mobile, just not to console yet, then you could, and they are perhaps in a territory where investing some money into a couple months learning curve isn't that expensive, then you could still consider like having them figure it out on their own. If not, then we can of course find the right porting partner, and for that we will find porting partners that have particular experience with that engine, that platform. So it could be a porting partner that only works with Unity, but it could also be a porting partner that specializes in proprietary engines or in something much more colorful like HTML5 or GameMaker or Cocos, and then make sure that we have the right fit in that sense. There are also places that specialize, for example, in doing the optimization for Switch. That comes with having to downscale whatever the game is to make sure that it runs. So there are a lot of ways that you can help devs bring their projects to other platforms.
All right. Hans is watching now, so we have to stop talking about him. You know, now he's going to hear us. How important is it to simultaneously launch now on all these platforms versus launching on a primary platform and then following up with, you know, the other platforms later?
That would also be something that Hans has more insight on than I do, but in general, again, every project is a unicorn, so there are different strategies that work best for every different project. Sometimes, like, of course, ideally, you want to do everything at once. Making that splash, having all your marketing budget focused on that one launch is going to generally be the best way. But if your project needs more attention beforehand, sometimes the best route to market is just doing that early access on Steam first, and then sometimes even releasing PC first, or postponing the full PC release until you've got the ports ready. So it depends, and it's also not like that particular launch moment is so important that we wouldn't consider titles that have already launched. It's not a blocker for us. If we see the potential, then having it sim ship across platforms isn't all the way at the top of the list.
So yeah, and we've seen that change in the last 5 or 10 years. It used to be that if a developer had launched anything, even like early access, all the publishers would be like, "No, we don't want it. You've already launched it. We've missed the window. We can't do anything. It's a giant waste of time. Go away." And now that's not the case. I mean, we work with some publishers who actually only look for games that have already launched to try to give them a bit of a second wind.
Yeah, that applies for us too. Like, I won't say that absolutely not. We're looking for just about everything, but it helps for us if there's a game, for example, that has launched on Steam, either in early access or for a full release, and we can see that it is already proving itself. It already has like 80% positive plus. So it already has just some sort of, I guess, proof that it's fun. It has a small community, then we've got something to build off of. And with the amount of new titles that are releasing on any given day, that launch moment is not necessarily as important anymore, as long as you maximize the visibility that you get after launch. So we're seeing sometimes sales match or even exceed the launch day. So we might as well take a look at the project, see if whatever we can still do with it.
That's interesting.
So we got a couple questions from chat. One of them is from Corundum Games. So, in other words, if you're using a common engine like Unity and are willing to do the port yourself but have no experience doing so, is that a net positive?
Well, having experience doing it would be the biggest positive, of course. Having your game in Unity tends to be easier than having a custom engine. So I think the question is kind of separate parts. The part about it being in Unity, that is definitely useful because there's a lot of porting studios that specialize in it. Not having porting experience itself isn't necessarily a positive, but it's also not a blocker.
Interesting.
A lot of these questions, and even when I gave my lecture last week in Poland, I was like, I'm going to talk to you for an hour now about this stuff, but go ahead and understand that the majority of the questions are answered with, it depends, because there's never an easy answer. So, all right, so keep going, Andy.
Okay. Yeah, the next question was from Just a Game Developer. How much muscle does Soedesco actually have in marketing? Steam algorithm has destroyed indies pretty much, and Switch games generally sell themselves. How much more does it actually help going with a publisher like Soedesco and saying you have localization connections and can develop on other platforms yourself?
So I intentionally did not want to go into the marketing and PR and the budget part, because that is what every developer asks for. For us, it's more about the entire strategy of helping you bring the game to market with everything else that needs doing. So the marketing muscle, that will entirely depend on the project. There are genres that we're more familiar with. There are genres that we would be are exploring that we're happy to work with, and there's a very select group of titles that we don't tend to work with, and we're also very open and transparent about that. So it's really about finding the strengths both with the dev and with us, and then what additional value we bring to the table would be everything else that we can do. That isn't necessarily always very obvious, such as a bunch of the things that we've been talking about so far.
I mean, I'll dive in on that one just a little bit, because I actually don't agree with two of those points. The Steam algorithm has changed, but it hasn't destroyed indies by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I'm sitting here looking at the top selling on Steam right now, and 2 Point Hospital, which is a very indie title, is in the top 10. Disco Elysium is in the global top selling. I mean, you're always going to have titles from the major publishers selling more because they have more marketing, but Steam hasn't necessarily destroyed indies. It's just a matter of everybody has to adapt, and everybody always has to adapt. And Switch games don't sell themselves. I mean, you look at how many games are on Switch now. I mean, a year and a half ago, you could get away with releasing, pretty much anything. But now the Switch e-store is so cluttered and overpopulated that it's absolutely not a given that just because you release something, it's going to get seen. So
yeah, so I guess the answer to the muscle question, Switch is a good example for that. Like right now, it's not a given that you're going to get access to a Switch development kit, that your project is going to get greenlit, because the eShop is flooding so fast. They have to start doing a little bit of curation about what is going to actually end up there. And we can help developers actually get that access. And similarly, we can help you get through the submission process more smoothly. And then after you've launched, we can help you get that visibility again by monitoring your sales, and the seasonal ones and the regular ones that you can do. So you don't have to spend any of that time, and therefore you can focus on your next game. So as I mentioned, it's not necessarily rocket science, but it's time where we can use our experience, our time, to help you do what needs to be done to maximize the potential, while you can do what you do best and not have to spend a couple hours every week making sure that you're in sales, and you can spend that time actually creating your next game.
Which becomes more than just a couple of hours every week, the more things keep going down this path. All right, let's talk about retail. And because retail is something that really died off for a while, but now it's starting to come back. We're seeing more physical copies going out, even things like Blizzard releasing this is just asinine to me, I'm sorry, but Blizzard releasing a physical copy of Overwatch for the Switch that does not contain a cartridge. It's just a piece of plastic. I mean, just, environmentalism aside, that just blows my mind. But we've also had a rise of companies like Limited Run Games that are doing these special editions. So I know 10, 15 years ago, sitting down and coming up with special editions where we had this gigantic box and it had like a map in it and all kinds of other random shit that got put in these boxes. That was a huge part of everything. And then it went away. So how, are you seeing retail come back? And I'm not talking about actual like sales numbers here, but, when we're talking about good publishers that can help us with SKU strategy and retail submission and all of these things that actually, what makes a good special edition a good special edition. How has that changed lately? And how are you attacking that aspect of it?
So I can't really speak for the market on the whole because I don't have all that information myself. Our team is pretty big by now. We're 30 plus, so we have people that are specialized in all of those fields. So we have 2 people for sales. We have someone for merchandising to make sure that they are at the top of their game. Overall, I think, of course, retail is in decline, but there's still a lot of market out there. What we can never forget is that there's a whole lot of people out there that may not necessarily consider themselves gamers, but they do have to buy gifts for people. So they do wander into store like giving that physical thing more than just giving a card with a code on it. It's still a very different market that doesn't necessarily entirely overlap with the digital market out there. So it is still a lot of potential there. And with regards to special edition, I have no out was 10 to 15 years because I haven't been in the industry that long. But for us, as Soedesco, with our history, Soedesco originally was started as an accessories label. It would do bundles together with, it would package a game together with some accessories, and it's something that's been coming back for every console generation since, where simply doing merchandise, there's a much bigger margin on that, which means that it only makes sense to package your game with some additional content to be able to get a bit more revenue from that as well. So there is really no reason not to explore whatever opportunity you have, as long as the product is even suitable for the retail market to begin with.
So from the production standpoint, how does shipping for retail differ than shipping for digital?
It takes more time. So it begins with all the way at concept submission. You have to get approval for doing retail, which also means that you need a certain kind of agreement with each of the different platform holders to be able to do them. And then the actual concept for retail has to get approved. After that, your submission is also a little different, because your build that you submit with them has to be suitable for retail as well. Requires a couple extra submission checks. You have to be gold a lot sooner. So, for example, if you want to do a console retail version, that can be anywhere between 2 to sometimes 8 weeks before your actual release time, to be able to manufacture everything, ship it everywhere. And then if you're doing a special edition, you can add anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple of months. If it's just a soundtrack or a manual that you add within the box, then that's one thing. But if you start adding bigger things, or particularly things that require your additional content match, for example, European legislation, such as plushies or materials with metals in them, you're going to have months and months of lead time running up to your release. It's also something that's very unusual when we hear a lot of indie devs. It's like, oh, we hit gold, and now in 1 week we're going to release. And for us, that's a little unusual, because usually on the producing side, by the time a game releases, we've been done for 2 months. So we'll still be working on like patches and DLC, of course, but for us, like the base game, yeah, we had to be gold like weeks ago to be able to make that ship date.
It's funny. All of this stuff that you're rattling off just makes me even more thankful that I haven't produced a game in 10 years, because it's like the thought of, oh wait, we're gonna put this plushie in here. Wait a minute, France says we can't do that because it might catch fire, and I'm like, oh what? No, just make games. But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, that's what I remember back in the day when you had to have this time of year, everything absolutely had to be on the shelf by the second week of November, or you were basically screwed because you missed Black Friday and all of that kind of stuff that went along. And yeah, if we didn't have submissions done 1st of September, you weren't going to make it. That was it. You're going to Q1. And so it obviously hasn't gotten simpler in the time since then, but we did have a nice little period.
From what I've heard, some of the things have gotten easier. So
there's more things now. That's the problem.
Yes.
I mean, getting it onto a disc and getting it to the store has got to have gotten a lot cheaper a lot easier in the last 10 years. But there's just so much other stuff that you factor into, and this is where we come into these discussions are great, because it lets people understand what they don't know. And it's like, even me, I'm sitting here learning things. We used to deal with ESRB and PEGI ratings. Outside of that, didn't matter. Just go and do it. And now, there's a different one for Korea, there's one for Japan, there's the Iarc, there's all of this stuff that you don't have, even as a developer, you simply don't have time to think about, much less execute. A lot of the developers that we're working with, it's 2 people. And so they hire people like my firm because they need help on the business side, and they can't manage everything on their own. And this is just a whole nother wave of it. We're not at the point where you finish a game, you upload it to Steam, you hit launch, and then you go and collect your money. It's a very, very complex world that we're dealing with here.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't necessarily see don't necessarily always see that developer publisher relationship like two different beasts. We are an extension of your team, or that's ideally what we're supposed to be. So you've got your artists, you've got your designers, and then you've also got the people that are taking care of all the assets that you have to create for the storefronts, because you need like 240 of them to be able to launch everywhere. We want to be your support on everything else that needs to happen to be able for your game to be able to go live. So that would be ratings, that would be translations, but that would also be making sure that if your artist gets sick and you need 20 more 3D models like this, then we can probably find that partner for you. We're not here to be some sort of monster that just takes money from you. We want to work with you and help your team get your game to market in the best way possible.
And that's a very, very important point, because publishers are typically seen as, oh my God, here's this company that's going to take 30% of my revenue, and what are they actually doing? And coming from someone who deals with literally 650 plus publishers globally, there is a gigantic difference between a good publisher that wants to be involved and cares about this sort of stuff, and one who's just going to ship something. And when it's like everything else in life. When someone else has to put a lot of their own time or money into something, you're going to get a better result. And with publishers like Soedesco and that size company that we're talking about, it's very painful for you if a game doesn't do well, just as it's bad for the developer. So, when you're not launching 30 games a year, it's one of those things where there has to be a very symbiotic relationship between the developer and the publisher, because everybody's got a lot to lose here.
Yeah, I mean, when I say we have a team of 30 people, that also means we have a team of 30 people to feed. All of these people, well, okay, when it's a digital-only title, it might not be the entire 30, because everyone that's specialized on the retail side may not be involved. But we have always at least 20 people that are working on a title that we sign, and that will be a community manager, the marketing manager, PR. It will be people in graphics. It will be the person helping with trailers. We'll have several producers and several interns that are helping with preparing builds for submission. But we also have someone for finance, someone for sales, biz dev, to be able to talk to platform holders. There's so many people that we also have to feed on our side, that we also have to sustain, that for us, it's key that our projects do well. Like, it's not just for the developers. I mean, we're here to make sure that we survive as a business too.
Which we all want to do. And we just saw, sadly, this came up yesterday. Backflip Studios went out of business. I guess they announced it yesterday. And if you think back and you remember 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Backflip was on top of the world because for 2 years in a row, Dragon Veil was one of the biggest mobile games in the market, and they had tons of money coming in. But, they made it, 5 years in the industry, maybe 10, but there are very serious consequences to having a project go poorly, both from the developer side and the publisher side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what you've got the same list I do right now. Look at it, and there's so much stuff on here that you do. What do you think is the next biggest aspect of this that we haven't touched on yet? Because we could sit here and go through all of it, but we'll be here for 2 hours.
Well, something that we're currently expanding on is the different kinds of ways that we're engaging with the public before releasing. So something that we've recently done is several private, closed, open betas, playtesting rounds. So that's something where we are doing more and more. And from that, we're gathering more and more feedback. Not just the functional testing, like the bug testing, making sure that everything works the way it's supposed to, but also providing a lot more feedback on how the mechanics are, if they're fun, if there should be several different levels of difficulty. And from there, we are also gaining more and more experience in supporting developers with not really creating the actual game concept, but polishing it and even just some narrative support where a team maybe isn't that big, and they're not entirely confident that their plot line is working out in the game as well as they want, where we are now, well, of course, we always gave feedback ourselves, but we're also able to help get that community backing for the team to feel like, hey, we're heading in the right direction, or maybe this and that section could use some polishing to make sure that we're actually delivering that experience that we had in mind. So that is something that we've recently been working on a lot. And that, of course, also comes with, it depends for every single project what you need. Some projects are created by a very, very small development team, so they can really no longer see the forest through the trees. Means that a lot of having some extra pairs of eyes already helps a lot. And some projects have a bigger, more experienced development team, and then it really just comes down to balancing the finest details by finding the perfect players that know that genre through and through. So that's something that we've recently been doing a lot.
So, I mean, years ago, everything was done through closed betas, and you would start and you do like a friends and family beta, then you do a closed beta, and then you do an open beta before you went live. How much of that is still done, given the rise of early access now?
For us, it entirely depends on the project and what it needs. So for some projects, some genres, it doesn't make sense to do an open beta, for example, because it's a short experience, it's linear. So by the time that someone's played through it once, then maybe you have no reason to buy it anymore, or you've already seen it all. So for every single project that we sign, we'll talk to the developer to see what kind of strategy makes sense. And sometimes that indeed involves doing the very small, and then the maybe the closed, maybe the open. But sometimes early access is the right way to go too. So I think rather than having the same model for everything, it's moved to something where it's going to be custom for every project.
Which in turn, ramps up the difficulty and the complexity of everything on that side. When it comes to things like community support, and I know that gets wrapped into marketing, in a lot of cases, but where do you start getting the community involved? How do you manage that feedback loop to the developer? And, because that factors into the open and closed betas and the early access. But assuming you've got something that is in early access, how does that feedback loop work when it comes to tweaking things like balance and a lot of those issues that you brought up?
For us, what we try to help with is making sure that we are able to gather all the feedback, because you're getting so much feedback from all different kinds of channels. Discord is helping with that a lot. So a lot of players actually find their way to a game's Discord, but that still means you have the Steam Community Hub, you have two different support addresses that feedback ends up in, and sometimes people are talking to a developer directly, maybe Twitter, maybe other social channels. So the first thing we do is help gather all the feedback and make sure that we also tally what kind of things are coming in from multiple people to make sure that we've got the pain points, the things that stand out to multiple people, that we've got those highest on the list. Also, like sometimes a lot of reports come in that on the surface appear to be different, but then when you dig into them, they actually appear to be the same. So we'll help put together cohesive reports that actually make sense to a developer, and then we provide them with an entire list of, hey, these are all the things that we've noticed, both internally and from the people that are reporting stuff to you, to us. This is how we would prioritize them, and then talk to the developer about what kind of things should be tackled first, how much time is that going to take, what are the different solutions that you might be able to offer, because a developer might say like, hey, I want to solve this the perfect way, but it's going to take 3 months and I don't have that 3 months right now. So we could talk to them like, okay, so what are the alternatives? Is there a way that we can mitigate the pain so at least the player isn't stuck on it anymore? See if we can implement that quickly and then postpone the bigger fix until later. And then after that, at some point, the developer will have a version with a bunch of fixes in it. We will either, depends on if the project is out in early access or not. So if it's out in early access, we might be happier to just push it to the public because the public is aware that it's early access. So they are going to see things that aren't final yet. But if it's a project that isn't announced to the public yet, or if it's just a bigger project in general, then internally we can also support with making sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, either with internal people or with external testers. From there, you move on to you've got a patch note list. You've confirmed that the fixes that were meant to be in there are in there properly, and we also help with communicating what's going out there to the public. So you have a lot of people that are asking like, hey, how about this thing? How about this other thing that was reported? And then we can help report back to the public like, this is what was fixed and this is how it was fixed. So they're all along the process, we're able to support just to either offer a couple extra hands, extra eyes, different perspective. Yeah, basically from the moment that feedback is reported to reporting that follow-up back to the public.
So what sort of tools do you, I mean, aside from Discord, I mean, you've got all of this data coming in from all these different aspects, and this isn't even accounting any kind of like data that's being captured in the game, but you've got feedback coming in from Discord and from Twitter and from forums and like 2 support email addresses, which is actually shows the age of how things are going, and the fact that my first thought was people still email things into support, but I guess
Yeah, there you go.
Why would you email somebody when you can just rant and rave and bitch on Twitter? You know, but how do you?
Yeah, but not everyone has Twitter. World shocking news, not everyone has Twitter.
What a concept. What tools do you use to manage all of that?
Right. So what's most important for us is that the people that are collecting that feedback have an agile, fast way of managing that data. So we will always just start with an Excel sheet or a Google sheet to be able to make sure that everyone has access and everyone can report the most vital information very quickly. And that will just be a short description, like a name and a short description of what's going on. Make sure that footage is reported, that we have a date assigned, and then a developer can start following up on, hey, this is something that was intended, something that I can fix. These are the ways that it can be fixed. Maybe a specific patch version will be assigned. So we will have just an overview of all the different kinds of feedback that are coming in. If it is a bigger or more complex project, then maybe we'll move to a specific bug tracking database. Sometimes a developer will provide one, but not everyone is technical. Not everyone is equally well versed with working with bug tracking databases. So that is something that tends not to be used as much when development is already a bit further. So it's more for the very heavy bug tracking load for bigger teams in particular. So it again depends on what kind of project, what stages it is in, and then making sure that the entire team is as enabled as possible to help in any way they can.
All right, so we've only got a few minutes left because Indy's got a hard stop. He's got a meeting. He has to go be professional. If you've got questions,
to try. As professional as one can be with a mohawk, I guess.
Exactly. If you've got questions for Juney, pop them in the chat wherever you're watching. We will see it. It all comes together in one big handy dandy, stream for us. And keep in mind too that Juney, as well as all of our guests, are on our Discord server, and so you can always ask us there. It's discord.gg/indiegamebusiness. So, are there any final points? Anything we haven't hit that we absolutely should have in terms of the value that a publisher adds to a project outside of just giving the developer money and marketing it, Juney?
So I think something that I also want to emphasize is recently we've been working with a few developers that we started very small with, and from there, we've been building up the relationship. We've been building up trust. So where initially we would be doing the digital publishing for their very first game, they would then also start helping us with, hey, this other game needs some art assets. Can you help us right now? We also have this game that needs some art optimization, but the studio only has programmers. Can you help us with that? And along the way, that relationship became bigger and bigger and more intense, and now they are doing a very big project with us. They're doing one of our first party own IP projects, and that means that working with us and building up that long-term relationship can also give you some continuity for your company, because if you're delivering well for us, then we're going to ask you for help. If we feel comfortable with the communication with you, we want to work with you more, because apparently that there's a synergy and we're doing something right together. So by now, I think we've got half of their team on our biggest project, and that is a relationship that started 3-4 years ago. And first we did a couple small things, and now suddenly we're basically feeding half of their team, and for the coming 1.5 year. So that is something that we're seeing with a couple of other partners that we've been working with, where we will do their next title at retail, and then after that we might do a port for them, and maybe in the future we're going to do digital publishing for them as well. Or it's someone that is helping us out with a fire that we have, and then we're going to do something bigger with them the next time. And that way you can also build up a bit of security, continuity for your own team. And it's not just the long-term relationship of us publishing your projects, but also us making sure that all of the resources in your team are being used as well as possible. So if you have some leftover concept artists, for example, that aren't working on something for 2 months, having publishers or relationships that might be able to use the people that you have, that's also something to think about.
And part of it gets back to, just ask,
Absolutely.
And that's what a lot of folks aren't that comfortable doing, because they're afraid that they'll be perceived as inadequate, or they can't handle a project, or something along those lines. But it's the same as dealing with any group that aggregates talent, like our firm or a publisher. If you need access to something, you need like a new artist, or you need music, or something along those lines.
Or you need funds for additional kits, or you need access to a new platform, or your contact with a platform holder hasn't been responding for 3 weeks, or you're struggling with this tech problem that your programmers can't seem to figure out, and maybe one of our partner devs has done it 3 times, so they know what they're doing. Like, that is one of the points that's also on my list. Like, let us be your first line of help. Ask us if you're struggling. We may not have the answer, but we'll either know someone that does, or we're going to do our best and help you find it. So, like, that's also part of that long-term relationship. We're not here to, like, review your milestone and pay you when you make it, and then don't pay you if you don't make it. We're here to in it with you. Like, we want to help you be successful, in all honesty, for our sake as much as for yours.
Very true. All right, if you've got any questions, this is last call, and we got to let Indy go.
I have a question.
Go ahead, dude.
Go ahead.
Can we have a tour of your shelves behind your desk? And I also want to know, how neat is your desk?
My desk is empty. My desk is actually always empty. And the same applies to largely to my inbox. So I will always make sure that I morph my inbox into either tasks to do, or I just follow them up. So that is part of my strategy of staying safe.
I morph my inbox into a task list that I never look at. So, I mean, it's therefore the inbox is clean, but it's just another list.
I like to not have like more than 10 emails in my inbox. My wife has like 50,000.
Yeah, I can't do that.
I can't do that either.
I can't do that either. Okay, let's see the tour before we go.
Right. So ever since I first got a Game Boy Pocket and Pokemon Yellow and Tetris, I've been collecting consoles. So this is actually only what I have here. With my mom, I have way more. But basically, out of all consoles that are sort of common, I am missing, from the Pong machine all the way up to the newest generation. I do not have a Nintendo Switch. I do not have a PlayStation 4 Pro or an Xbox One S or an Xbox One X, but I have just about everything else.
Do you have a 3DO?
No, that one I do not, but I'm not sure how common it was in the Netherlands.
I don't know how common it was in Europe.
Yeah.
But it was the first CD-driven console.
It did come out.
I have everything from like Atari 2600. I have a video pack, an MSI. I have, let's see, what else? I have a picture set of most of it. Then I have everything Game Boy, so Game Boy Micro and Advance SP. And then over here, I basically have Wii U, GameCube. I have several GameCubes. NES, SNES. I don't have an Nintendo 64 here, but Sega Dreamcast, Xbox, a lot of PlayStations, the PlayStation handhelds too, of course. So yeah, basically everything retro that you can think of. I primarily just don't have the newest. And
That's
there's
funny.
Oshawott plushie, and there's also all the way at the top one of the special editions that we did for Owlboy specifically. So there's a whole lot of stuff in there.
Is that a Fallout Fat Boy up there at the top?
Yes, it is. That one is not mine. That's my partner's. So I mentioned that I don't have a Switch and a Pro and an X and an S, but he does. So I guess our family is complete regardless.
Yes, exactly.
That's funny.
Because you're supposed to share when you're an adult, you know.
Sure.
Exactly.
So what was your other question, Andy?
That was just how neat her desk was, and that's it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But I got to go because I got a meeting in 3 minutes.
All right. So Juney, thank you very much for coming on the show. This will be live in a few hours on our
Anchor.
podcast. Don't forget, if you go to indiegame.business, you can get your ticket to our next virtual business event where you can pitch your game to publishers or look for contract work. We got over 50 companies lined up so far.
That starts on the 7th,
that's
right?
coming up on the 7th and 8th. And 12 Days of Indie is coming up soon. Let's put Juney on the spot. Juney, can you contribute some codes to 12 Days of Indie for Toys for Tots to help kids?
Oh, absolutely.
See how easy this is when you have them on live camera, Indy?
Just pressure them, yeah.
That actually reminds me that everyone that pings me on Discord, the first 10 can get a Steam key for Dog Duty, a game that we've got in early access, real-time strategy game. Think Command and Conquer, that kind of...
Be a dog?
No, it's Dog Duty.
So your dog poop.
Play on the word. But yeah, ping me on Discord and I'll have a key for you.
I'm going to type very quickly here. There's our Discord.
There we go.
But yeah, all right.
Thank you guys so much.
This is awesome.
Yes, thank you
Indy,
too.
Have fun in your meeting. And Juney, have a great weekend.
Yeah, and then I'm gone for next week. Bahamas, baby.
Enjoy,
Have fun.
dude.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.